Hello everyone, I'm Jennifer. I'm sorry for some, but there's nothing I can do about it. Don't have time to do this show during the summer because I'm a kid. We are now at the end of August. It is August 22nd, I think, and the kids are back in school, or they will be soon. And I did an orientation for a local college last week, and I talked about how the world doesn't revolve around you and a bit about humanistic leadership. One of the questions I got was so cool that I decided to share it here and kind of weave the show around it today. The question was and you have to realize I was talking to a bunch of 17 and 18 and 19-year-old student athletes that were just going into college. And one of the boys up in the way back said, "Do you think too much?" And my first thought was, no, I don't think too much. Of course I don't think too much. But then, because I think too much, and I'm a critical thinker because I'm a humanist, I started to question whether the answer no was the right answer. Maybe I do think too much. And then I realized no, because I really don't think I do. A, thinking is a highly enjoyable practice for me. I love thinking. B, I get paid to think. This is what people pay me to do, to think. So how can someone this is my job, to think. So no, I don't think I think too much. I probably should think more. But it brought up an interesting point, my self-questioning of whether I think too much or not, kind of brought into focus that this is what free thought is. This is what critical thinking is about, is questioning yourself. Questioning your own thinking to figure out whether or not what you think is even true. So do I think too much? My first answer was no, but then I thought maybe. And that's a good sign. That's a sign of a healthy mind, that you're willing to question your gut reaction. If you want to be successful in life, you have to think. You have to think well. The better you think, the better off you're going to be. If you are trying to solve a problem, you need to think about how you're going to solve it. And if you're not willing to think about it, then you're just kind of floating around hoping for the best, doing your gut reaction. Sometimes gut reactions work, sometimes they don't. If you want to be an effective problem solver, you need and should be spending some time thinking, and you should think enough so that you get good at it. Because thinking well is not something we humans do easily. We all fall prey to deluding ourselves. So we do need to practice thinking, and in order to practice thinking, you have to do it a lot. My first response to this kid was, the unexamined life is not worth living. So let's start with that. In order to live life successfully, you have to contemplate who you are, what you want to be. You have to have some sort of idea of what it is you want to do with your life and what sort of person you want to be in order to pursue those goals. And that requires you to think. And, you don't want to think to the point that you don't act, obviously, but you do have to spend some time thinking. So, what is in that quote? The unexamined life is not worth living. Well, the reason for that is, if you have a set of ethics for yourself that you've thought out and you say, this is the sort of person I want to be, it makes your life so much easier, because it makes decision-making easier. It makes problem-solving easier because you have some sort of guide. What ethics do is they give you a guide to help you decide what is going to be good and what is going to be bad for you. And again, that's a thought. You have to have that thought. You have to think, okay, is this going to be good? Is having sex with a complete stranger whose health status is unknown and doing it unprotected a good idea or a bad idea? Well, that depends on what it is you value. And if you value health, then you might not want to do that. You might want to use protection. I don't know, just saying. So you do need to think, and I don't think intrinsically you can think too much. You can if you don't act on your thinking. If you just think and refuse to act and get paralyzed by your thinking, that's thinking too much. But thinking through your problem solving is a good thing, because that puts you in a good position to act and have a good outcome from your action. And that's really the goal. And that was what my talk was about, why the world doesn't revolve around you, is so that you can be more effective in life, that you can make better decisions, because your decisions will be based on reality and not on a fantasy that you're invincible and you can do anything you want, because, well, you can do anything you want, but there are consequences. And in order to maximize the good consequences and minimize the harm, you have to think about what the potential consequences are so that you can make a choice. The act of choosing is an act of thinking. So, if you are a musician or you're an athlete, you're into baseball, soccer, whatever, volleyball, baseball, softball, it doesn't matter what it is. In order to get good at that sport, you have to practice it. You're not just going to walk onto a field and be Magic Johnson or you know, whoever. You're going to have to practice and you're going to have to work at it. And the same thing holds true for thinking. You don't just think and be good at it. You have to practice. It requires discipline if you want to be good at thinking. And so the more you think, the more you're practicing, the better you're getting at it. And that's going to help you through the course of your life make better decisions for yourself that are going to maximize the good potential consequences and minimize the harm that you're doing to yourself and to other people. I don't know how you get good at thinking if you're not practicing it. So that's, you know, step one. You got to practice. So how can you think too much? Am I practicing my instruments too much? No. I mean, to be an expert musician, you need to be playing 6 or 7 hours a day. To be an Olympic quality athlete, you probably have to be doing that sport 6 or 7 hours a day. So thinking too much? No. I don't think so, because I don't allow my thinking to interfere with actually living. My thinking augments my life and helps me make better decisions in my life so that I can live life more fully and more intentionally. And let's talk about intentionality a little bit, because that's really, really important. To be a humanist is to make a choice to live life fully, to live life intentionally. In order to live life intentionally, you have to think about what your intentions are so that you can put those intentions into action and actually live by those intentions. That's an act of thinking. That's putting thinking into your life. You don't live life intentionally by not thinking. You live life intentionally by thinking. So do I think too much? No. No, I probably don't think enough, because there's times in my life where I do react on gut instinct. And I don't think through the consequences of my action. And I'm considered pretty good at it. I'm considered a pretty good critical thinker. I do question myself an awful lot and question whether what I'm doing is going to work, whether there might be a better way to do what I'm trying to do. What have other people done? What is other people's thoughts on this subject? I look at all of that a lot. And even I fail at times. No one thinks perfectly. All you can do is think better and practice more and get better at it and remind yourself to think before you act. It's, you know, when I was doing my talk last week, we did talk a little bit about drinking and driving, and I said the motto is drink responsibly, but really the motto ought to be think responsibly, because in order to drink responsibly, you have to think about how you're drinking, what you're drinking, how much you're drinking, whether it's going to benefit you or hurt you. Drinking responsibly is actually thinking responsibly. Thinking before you act to maximize the good and to minimize the harm. So the next aspect of thinking, and thinking well, is that thinking helps you with your morality. In order to be a good person, you have to have some sort of ethical system by which you judge good and bad. To decide what that ethical system is and what your morality is requires you to think. And in order to implement your morality, you have to think about the consequences of your actions. Good morality requires good thinking. It's not enough to want to do good in the world. If you can't sort out what's true and what's false, then your moral reasoning is going to be bad. The reason humanists spend so much time teaching critical thinking skills and talking about how we think, not what to think, but how we think, and why we study the art of thinking and practice thinking using those skills that are going to lead to good results. Why we're so committed to logic, why we're so committed to reason, why we're so committed to skepticism, why we're so committed to free thought, and why we care about what is real and what isn't. Any problem you're trying to solve, if you want to do it well and you want to be moral, you have to know what's true, what's not true, what's going to work and what's not going to work. Because it's very easy to do evil while trying to do good. The people who flew the planes into the towers on 9/11 thought they were doing good. That's why they did it. Most everybody in the world thinks that that was an evil act, and that the reasoning of the people who did that was flawed. That's why thinking is important. Thinking well is really important. Let's talk about some common things. We're in an election about is a war just or not? Any war. Whether we go to war or not and whether you think it's moral to go to war or not depends entirely on whose side of the rhetoric you believe. Who's telling the truth, who's lying, and they're probably all lying, right? So how do we decide whether something's moral or not? Let's talk about abortion. This is really contentious for a reason. Whether you think it's moral or not all depends on when you think life is viable, who you value. Do you value the baby? Do you value the mom? Do you value both of them? It's not easy precisely because the information is not necessarily clear and we all are working from different bits of information. What should we do about global warming? That depends on what's causing global warming or whether global warming is occurring at all. In order to make good decisions about these things, you have to know what's true, because if you are working on false information, information that's not true, your moral reasoning is going to be flawed because you don't have your facts straight. In order to be moral, you have to know what's true and what's false, whether what people are telling you is a lie or whether it's true. You have to be able to discern reality. Right now we're talking about abortion, and a Senate candidate, a Republican Senate candidate, just told us all that raped women don't get pregnant because they exude some sort of secret magic something that prevents pregnancy. Scientifically, that's a load of hogwash, and anybody who's scientifically literate knows that's a load of hogwash. Anybody who looks at the stats knows that's a load of hogwash. People who are ignorant and don't know that fact might believe that, especially if they have an agenda that makes them want to believe it, especially if they're not willing to question their own assumptions because they want something to be true. A humanist doesn't want something to be true. We want to know what is true, because we want to make sure our moral reasoning is good. We don't want to make our moral reasoning on assumptions as much as we can help it. We want to know what's true. And then we're going to base our moral reasoning on that. So, do I think too much? No, I don't. In order to be moral, in order to think through moral dilemmas, I have to think. Otherwise, I'm just choosing randomly and hoping for the best. And I'm not willing to do that. I want to be a moral person. I want to be an ethical person. I want my decisions to help not just me, but the community in which I live and the society in which I live. I want to do good in the world. And to do that, I have to think and figure out for myself using critical thinking, science, logic, reason, skepticism, and free thought, and question my own assumptions, and question whether what my gut is telling me is true or not, questioning myself to make sure that I am rigorous as possible in my reasoning so that I don't make mistakes in my reasoning, because mistakes can harm and hurt people. They can hurt and harm myself, and they can hurt and harm other people. This Representative Aiken, I'm not going to lie to you, he's an idiot. And if his policies were enacted, it would cause a tremendous amount of harm. He thinks he's doing good. All right? His motivation is to do good. It's just that he's not employing the thinking skills that are required to actually come up with good public policies, because he's ignoring reality because he doesn't care what is true or not. He thinks he already knows what's true, and he's not willing to be told differently. And there's a whole bunch of people coming out of the woodwork to agree with them that women who are properly raped, legitimately raped, don't get pregnant, to explain away all the pregnancies that occur from rape, as if there's some sort of different sort of rape. So, in order to be moral, you have to think. And you have to think hard, and you have to think well, and the better your thinking is, and the more skilled you are at thinking and being critical of yourself and your assumptions, and using free thought to challenge your assumptions, and knowing how to evaluate scientific information to find out whether the scientists did a good job or not, knowing the rules of logic to know when you've made a mistake in your logical reasoning or whether someone else has made a mistake in their life. This is all critical to coming up with good public policy and good moral public policy. You have to think. There's no way to get around it. So can you think too much when you're thinking about ethics? No, you can't. Unless, again, you get stuck and you just refuse to act or you refuse to come to a conclusion. We do have to make decisions on incomplete information, I would say. We don't have the luxury of having complete knowledge of how things will turn out in the future. We don't always have complete knowledge that we need to make good decisions. And we do have to make decisions regardless, otherwise we get stuck in limbo doing nothing. And that's not good. So thinking to the point that you can't think and then you can't act, that would be bad. But using good thinking skills to come up with good solutions that you can, so that you can be moral, is the right amount of thinking. The next reason why I think thinking is good is that it does help you prevent midlife crises. All right? When this kid asked me, do I think too much, my first thought is that's a kid who's going to end up with a midlife crisis. But then I thought to myself, because I was challenging my own thinking, well, maybe he asked that question and it's actually a really good question, and because he had the courage to ask it, he could avoid this. But the reason thinking about morality, spending the time to think about the sort of person you want to be, what sort of ethics you hold, and how you can implement that in your life to live more happily, more productively, and more intentionally, helps you because it helps define who you are. The number of people who get to their middle age just floating along because they didn't take the time to think about who they wanted to be, what sort of person they wanted to be deep down. They didn't take the time to think that out for themselves. They get to middle age, their secondary goals, I wanted to go to college, I wanted to play ball, I wanted to do whatever it is I wanted to do, I wanted to get a job. They accomplish all that. They get married, they have a kid, and suddenly they've accomplished all these goals and they don't know who they are. And the reason they don't know who they are is because they never spent any time to think about who they were when they were younger. And so they're doing it now. And that's why these midlife crises occur for the most part. They also occur because we make bad decisions and then we find ourselves in a place that we weren't expecting to find ourselves, and then we have to do, again, some thinking. And the more you can think before you act, the less those situations are going to come up for you, the less problems you're going to have. They're still going to occur, but they're going to occur less frequently because you're going to make better decisions if you think. So for me, I'm in my 40s now, and I've never had a midlife crisis. My motto for myself, be a good person, love other people, leave the world a better place, live life fully, that's not changed. I wrote that when I was 11. My core of who I am, live life to the fullest, love other people, and leave the world a better place, never changed. And I don't expect to have a midlife crisis because I've already done that thinking, and I think about it all the time to see whether who I want to be and what sort of person I want to be is still applicable to where I am in the here and now. This is an ongoing process for me. This sort of thinking is ongoing. So I firmly believe that spending some time to think about what it is you value, what your ethics are, what sort of person you want to be, and how you want to live your life, not what you want to do, but how you plan to approach the job of living, it pays dividends throughout the entirety of your life, one of them being that you're going to avoid those midlife crises because you're going to be skilled in practice so that when you have a problem that crops up that makes you think what the heck it is you're doing, you're prepared to think through it rather painlessly because you're practiced at thinking. If you've never spent any time thinking about these things at all, you have to start from scratch when these things come up. And it's not easy because, as I said earlier, you have to practice thinking all the time to be good at thinking. You don't get good at thinking just magically because you want to suddenly think. It takes an effort. It takes work. It takes discipline. Because what you have to do is question yourself and challenge yourself, and a lot of people are not used to doing that. and they're not used to thinking about their morality to put their morality into action. They're not used to thinking about how they want to live their life. They're so busy thinking about what they want to do with their life. They forget to think about how they want to approach what it is that they do. And that's what thinking does for you. And that's why, again, I don't think you can think too much. There's no other way to get there but to think. And it's going to pay you dividends if you do. So I think the next question, we're going to get off the topic of thinking for a little bit and answer a question that I get a lot, which is humanism some sort of cult, touchy-feely, good-feeling cult? And the answer is no, it's not. We're just a group of people who have decided to live life intentionally, and to do so by being the best, most ethical person we can be, to live life fully, to try to make the world a better place, not just for ourselves, but for everyone else. We are people who have chosen to integrate our ethics into our daily life, and we do that intentionally and daily, and by thinking about what it is we do before we do it. Again, and this comes back to thinking. In order to do that, we have to think before we act. And that's why we use the critical thinking skills and the skepticism and the free thought and the logic and science, is so that we can do that well. What is going to help us be happy? What does science have to say on that? Turns out that feeling compassion helps you feel happy. Good to know. How can we maximize happiness in ourselves? Well, it turns out there's science for that too. But you have to be willing to even ask these questions of yourself to even get there. And Make a Sandwich just asked, what are your thoughts on genetically modified, am I right, genetically modified food? Is that correct? Organisms. Oh, organisms. Sorry. I think they're inevitable. I think it depends. I think that the jury's still out on this. It's a little scary, right? But on the other hand, there's potential good there. So the question, as always, with all science, is how do we maximize the good and minimize the harm? And have we spent time in advance thinking through those potential possibilities so that we maximize the good and minimize or eliminate the harm? You know, I think GMOs could very well help us cure cancer and do all sorts of things, and that would be worthwhile. Having a GMO go out and decimate our food crops, that would be bad. So I think most humanists are going to have split feelings on that, and that's not unusual. When a moral issue is not clear-cut or well-defined or doesn't have enough data on one side or the other to help us decide what the moral thing to do is, it's not unusual. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of social issues that humanists are very, very conflicted on because what our background is and what our knowledge base is and what we think to be true dictates what we think is moral. And we might not be correct. And that's part of, pre-thought and critical thinking, is to understand that what you think is true might not be true and to be willing to challenge yourself to find out.